Great. I'd like to welcome you all, especially those of you that have joined us today on this second webinar of our Advance Your Career series on the topic of developing your leadership. So welcome to all those who could join us live. We took on board your feedback from a learner survey that we conducted, where you expressed an interest in hearing directly from leaders on their experiences of developing their careers. So I'm really pleased to be joined by my former colleague and mentor, Pauline, who is an incredible leader in her own right, having been principal and chief executive of a college and co-founder of the Women's Leadership Network. Her dedication to further education awarded her with an OBE in 2013, and she has worked tirelessly to support leaders of the future. Pauline, welcome. It's so lovely to have you.
Thank you, Sarah. And it is absolutely delightful to be working with you again. And just for our guest listeners, we worked together at the Education Foundation, and I always felt that you were a talented and really hardworking and conscientious individual. And I have huge respect and watch your career with interest. So it's lovely to be sharing this platform with you today. And it's really great to be able to welcome the participants. I'm sorry I can't see you all because it makes it much more interactive, but I really do enjoy presenting in this way and kind of sharing some thoughts about my particular journey. And if any of it resonates with you and helps you prepare for your journey, then I've done my job today. So I really would welcome any thoughts that you have. Please put them in the chat. Any questions that you have as we go through, please put them in the chat. I really do like it to be able to respond to your thoughts and put your thoughts in there as well, any reflections you have. So what I'm going to do is to share with you some slides today with some thinking behind my journey, because I'm coming to the latter part of my career, and you're on your journey at the beginning of your career. So I'm going to talk about it today in the aspect of sort of your having a journey that you're on for career development, and starting with that wonderful phrase by Aristotle about the challenge is to choose to be who we want to be, but personal development as an investment. And Sarah's going to kindly change the slides for me as we go through. And one of the things I just wanted to share with you is the importance of thinking about it as an investment, because a recent survey, well, it was 2015, so it's not quite as recent, but found that people have between 18 and 50 jobs in their lifespan. And that's on average, it's 12. But actually, so what we're doing today is having portfolio careers, isn't it? Mm. So we're moving and we're shaping our career as it goes. And you can see from my diagram, I wanted to make it fairly fluid because it really is about taking opportunities and things like that. So I'll talk to you about what I think are those key aspects for success. And I'll be interested to hear and get your feedback. And the other thing, when I was researching for today, the other thing that I found interesting was the number of 41% of recent graduates are not working in a field where they got a degree. And I think that's quite fascinating too, that we need to be linking learning, but thinking more laterally about learning.
I think, and that's a really interesting point you touched on there, Pauline, because you know, we were just talking just earlier about the podcast that I did as part of the Learn Better series at Kaplan, where we talked about skills of the future, that we can't predict what the jobs of the future are going to be. So even if we do a degree in something, it may be that a job opens up in a new field, or under a new piece of legislation or regulation that we hadn't yet considered, and we have to be open to that and open to learning as we go.
Absolutely, yes, and taking opportunities as they come too.
Pauline, before we continue, I noticed we hadn't clicked the launch button for the poll. I wonder whether this was a good moment to kind of pause as people are looking through your first slide to answer those questions.
Brilliant, thank you.
So I'll just launch that now. Feel free to answer those questions, and we'll come back to the results a little bit later. Brilliant.
Okay. I hope you can all see the questions.
Yes, they're coming. People are answering them now, so they are coming through.
Good, good, good. Okay, shall I carry on?
Yes, please do carry on, Pauline. Yeah.
Okay. So when we're thinking about whether we choose our career with our hand, head, or heart, it really is a question of what, from my perspective, one of the things I've always felt is that we really should choose something that we are really good at. We should choose something that we really enjoy, and we should choose something that we are influenced by. So it's really a question of hand, head, heart. So what we're good at, using our hands, using our brains, what we enjoy, our heart, what passion we get for doing things, and how we can influence people using our head, because that's really important as part of leadership. But I'll be interested to see your results as we go through.
I think we've had most people respond. So if you're happy, I'll end the poll now. Yeah. And I'll share the results, which are really interesting because it's a real split almost. Most people, in answer to the first question, hand, head, or heart, it feels that most people are kind of saying hand or head, but actually not as many people as I was expecting were saying heart, which is very surprising. But actually, in terms of the second question, so are they clear about their future? Actually, the majority are saying no, which again, really interesting. And I think you've come to the right place, so that we can kind of explore that through this presentation with you.
Absolutely. And I also think the other thing for me is, are you doing a job, or do you have a career, or is it a true vocation? And I think that is something else to ponder on, because people, in my perception, and this is a personal view, people who just do it for the job, and there's nothing wrong with any of those aspects. You're doing the job because you want to earn the money, because you want to live the lifestyle that you want to live. And that, for some people, is absolutely fine. Then you get people who think of it as a career, which is what we're talking about today, where you really think about where you are now and where you want to go. But the third factor is you get those people who are more than career orientated, who really see it as a true professional vocation and really want to be the best they can be, and they want to be leaders of some kind or innovators of some kind. And as I say, there's nothing wrong with any of those. It's just, what is your personal preference? And I think when you're starting your journey, it's really helpful to think about that.
Absolutely.
So next slide, please, Sarah, because I'm going to take us on. We've got a number of slides that I'm going to talk through, and I hope they're helpful, just prompts and reflector points for you. So first of all, what I would say is, when we're thinking about why we do what we do, I think it's important to start with the why. And Simon Sinek is really good at actually sort of bringing the point home, in that most people choose what they want to do. They think about the what and they think about the how, But actually, if you think about the why, what is the purpose and why would you want to do it? Is it because you want to earn lots of money? Is it because you feel you need to spend time, doing the roles that you do? Whatever is your driver. But I think it's really important to think about why as a starting point for what it is you want to do and to feel fulfilled in the jobs that you're doing. It might be that you want to be in a caring profession, or it might be that you feel you want to use your hands because you really like working with tools, or it might be you like working outside, that kind of thing. And research has shown that personal development, which comes from comes from thinking about our careers and reflecting in this way and starting by a core purpose, is really important, because investing in your development, I think, is really, really good, and it will improve your life, I believe. It certainly has for me. And I think it's not about really stagnating. It's about shaking off that stagnation and really kind of moving forward and keeping the challenge going and keeping it interested, because we know that it's really good for the brain, and that research shows that if we're really stimulated by what we do, with the neurons in our brain will thank us for the stretch, and it releases endorphins in your brain, and it makes you feel better, and it makes you work better. So
that's a positive message for apprentices joining us today, who should be feeling all of those positive endorphins.
Well, I do hope so. Let's look at the next slide.
So is that the right slide? You've seen that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to think about those aspects and drivers that come from your why. But it's also really important to think about your identity. And I'm going to take you through some thinking about identity and how we think about our own identity and how that identity shapes us. And one of the ways in which we know who we are and what makes us so different, is through the next slide. And you'll see that what we do is we all see life differently, don't we? We define what we hear through our own lens, from the culture and from the values, the way we're brought up. All of those things help to shape us. And this slide sort of kind of conveys that we're all different, which makes us unique and special. And I think it's that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about our career journey.
And what about your career journey, Pauline? What kind of brought you forward?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Just to share a little bit about my journey. I mean, I'm a child of the 1950s and 1960s, when life was very different. And I lived in rural Lincolnshire. I had a very working class parents but also that had a very strong work ethic. And it really was a different time. So my lens, where I grew up, I saw things very differently. And for me, that has helped to shape me and what I've done with my career, because at the time, only 1.2% of women went to university. Think about that. 1.2% of women going to university is astounding.
Shocking.
And it was a very different time for women. They were not allowed at the time to study some qualifications. So they couldn't do law, for instance. Some exceptional women were allowed to go and do law, but not to get a degree. They could study it, they couldn't get the qualification. And women were very differently thought of in society. And certainly my schooling was like that. the teachers and parents had very narrow expectations for girls, and certainly it was the norm to expect that you would work until you got married and have children, and then you're running a home. And it really was a very, very different time. What I wanted to do was just to share with you 2 or 3 slides from that period of time. They are American, but remember, in the 50s, we didn't really have commercial television. So that's why the posters are American. Do you want to just take us through the slide? And I would love to hear in the chat what your perceptions are of these slides and about what the expectations for women were at the time.
They're quite shocking, aren't they? When you look back at them, and I can see how being exposed to this type of advertising and the conversations you must have had with people would have really shaped who you are and what you feel to be perhaps unjust or just not right.
Well, this one is a case in question, isn't it? Blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. I mean, just really outrageous.
And this one's really interesting because it's not those historical imagery that you've had before.
No, that's right. This is well, reasonably recent. I think they're about 5 years old or something, but you can still see that they don't look like people in the general population, do they? Lots of people that wouldn't recognize themselves.
It makes it hard to find someone that you might relate to as a leader if you don't see someone that you would immediately relate to.
Absolutely. We haven't got any comments, so perhaps people aren't as finding it as strange as we are. So, but moving on then, one of the things that then shaped my career was really this sense of unfairness in society, and that my drivers and values were really based on supporting people to be the best they could be for themselves, and really working hard in terms of equity and for women, but also for all of the different minority groups. So inclusion and diversity are really dear to my heart, and I've done quite a lot of work on that. I think the other thing in terms of our own experience and it shaping us, I think my first, just exploring some of the things I did, my first career choice would have been, when I left school, was to join the family business, which was a plumbing and electrical business. But my family sadly said no, they wouldn't hear of it because I was a girl. And in fact, my brother took over the role. And so what I chose to do was to go to college and to study hairdressing, beauty therapy, and wig making. And although I moved on from that quite quickly, I always remember that as being a really solid grounding for all sorts of things that have stood me in good stead throughout my career, because it taught me so much about people management, time management, customer care, the value proposition for people. And so my lens was built up from this strong feeling of unfairness for women, and wanting to do something that I could help to be the change in that particular mechanism. So I went into teaching and went to train as a teacher. And that really for me was my true vocation. I found my vocation. I found a place where I could use all of that passion and all of that drive and energy to help people that are so diverse, that were really underrepresented. And so my career took shape from there. And I have to say, I've never regretted all of the things that I've done in my career, but I also want to say that I never plotted it. I never had a plan. I never thought this is where I'm going to go next. I was very much of the view that it would be those values and those drivers and the personal aspects that would take me where I wanted to go, and I would be open to it. But we'll come on to that a bit more in a little while. So the next slide just talks to a set of core values, and you might want to think about what your core values are, because it's really helpful, you know, when you go for interviews, to be really clear about what your values and your drivers are, because people will ask you, and the more senior you get in an organization, the more important they will become. Because two things: you will learn to go and work in somewhere that has the same value set that you have, and they will be looking for people to employ who have the value set and of the culture of their particular organization. So core values are a really important aspect to think about when you're thinking about your why. Next slide. The next point is about being authentic. And this is it's a very modern phrase, isn't it? Everybody talks about authenticity. And I thought it would be useful just to explore a little bit about what I think it means, and see whether you feel free to share whether you agree with me or you feel that it's something different. But I think being authentic in leadership is so important. And being your true self, I think, again, is so valuable. If we can go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit more why. So for me, these are the aspects of my authenticity that I try to live by. So I really have developed a strong sense of ethics and standards of the way I work, about respecting people, being genuine about what I do. I've always worked in public service, so that's really dear to my heart, giving something back. Inclusion, but another aspect of being authentic is about being able to admit that you make mistakes, because I think strong leadership is a really strong predictor of satisfaction, and it comes across in staff surveys all the time, that if you've got managers and leaders that respect you and they are authentic and you know where you are with them, then it is so important.
Pauline, we've had just as you were talking about that authenticity and admitting mistakes, or perhaps even pointing out other people's mistakes. We had someone in the chat, Rachel, just asking whether women challenged that portrayal of advertising, you know, from the slides that we looked at earlier. Have you experienced any moments where you've had to challenge others about some of these values, and is that something, you know, you feel comfortable or felt comfortable doing?
Well, I certainly did it at home, because I was the younger child, and my older brother was treated very much differently to me. So it was a source of great frustration at home when my father and my brother came home from work, and they would just sit and read the paper and wait for the tea to be served. And my mother's cooking tea, and then she's expecting me to, not that I minded helping her, but it struck me as being so unfair. And my brother still laughs at me because of the way it shaped him, because of my incessant challenging him to be much fairer and much more equal. So I certainly started it at home, and I'm sure I did it through my career.
Brilliant, thank you.
I was also going to share just a story that I remember my first appointment to a senior leadership post in a college. And I joined a senior leadership team of 5 men. And it felt like I was on another planet. I felt completely alien. I didn't belong. The meetings would start with the rugby or the football or the golf that they'd all been to. And I really felt, you know, this strange creature that had joined this society that I didn't belong to. And as a newbie, my first sense was to really try to fit in with these male behaviours. And I quickly felt really unhappy with it because it made me feel that I wasn't being authentic. I was trying to fit into them rather than the other way around. So I quickly decided that come what may, I was going to be true to myself, and I was going to do my leadership in the way in which I wanted to lead. And certainly it proved to be useful, because the irony of that particular story in my journey was that in 5 years after that, I became the principal of the college. And there was a lot in between, but and that was great, because it gave me the opportunity of really shaping the culture to be really people-centric and do it in a much more supportive and nurturing way. So
it's interesting, Pauline, because you're obviously drawing on your own personal experiences from you know, and looking at it from a very female-centric perspective, but the messages I think you're trying to portray would be applicable to any individual. It's just about, like you say, finding your authenticity and being able to confidently say, you know, I don't have to fit in with this environment. You know, I can be myself and people will still accept me for that.
Yes, I think that's very true, but I think some people can take authenticity a bit too far.
Right.
So we also need to remember that there has to be an emotional control over being too authentic, because authentic, some people can say, well, I can say what I like and I can do what I like.
Very true.
It's not like that, is it? We have to be aware that the things that we say will impact on people, and it could get us into deep water if we don't think about the emotional connection that we need to make as well. And I think you're absolutely right. People do need to use their own style, but I think certainly leadership generally is becoming much more holistic in the sense that it is cultures are very people-centric, thinking that people are the thing that matters most, and how you work with people and how you treat people with respect and integrity. And another aspect of my leadership was it's much better to be, if you're challenging something, to be doing it shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. So because that kind of challenge doesn't get you anywhere, you just get people closing down.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so you see what I'm saying about shoulder to shoulder. You show some empathy with where they're coming from and you connect with them, but you can then also say that I have a different view, but can we talk about each other's view and can we come to some kind of conclusion? So moving on then to this little tool, I don't know whether anyone's come across this before. When you're thinking about your personality and who you are, I think the Johari window is something to reflect on, which is what parts of yourself are the known aspects and what are the blind spots that others know about you but you don't. So it's their perceptions of you, and that being self-aware and learning about yourself as part of your leadership is really important, to know those things that, because we're all different, we will do things that irritate some people because they're very different. So it's about recognizing some of those things in their blind spots. And it's about having conversations with people so that you really understand who they are more, but also that they understand you.
And Pauline, is this something to reflect on just in a work context, or should it also be about maybe your personal or, you know, personal, I don't know, preferences or personal traits that you might have?
It's very generally, you need to, if you're going to get on with life generally and really make lots of friends and have a good social life, it applies just the same, doesn't it, to
Very
your
true.
work situation, in my view anyway. So then moving on then, and sort of elaborating on this theme a little bit more, the next bit that I'm just going to talk about is the identity iceberg. So if you can go to the next slide. The identity iceberg is this, it's just this. It's about, we are different people, aren't we, at different times. So the bit of us that we declare on the surface are all those things that we feel, going back to the Johari window, we're happy to disclose and we're happy for people to see. But we may have masses of things under the surface that we will only give information on to those people we trust, when we feel we really comfortable with people and whether we belong. And this resonates a lot in the world of equality and diversity, and making sure that we really do all that we can when we're working with people to understand where they are and where their difference is. And just to give you an example, doing this kind of work in colleges, and getting students to talk together about their experiences and understanding, and being allies and buddies to each other in this holistic kind of way is really powerful. And it struck me this morning because on the news I saw it's Eid, and there was one group of students who did this. And the group themselves said, well, we've got one Muslim student in our group, in our team, and he's going to have to go through Eid and Ramadan, sorry, not Eid, Ramadan, and he's not going to be able to eat. So what we will do is, it'd be horrible if we go to the refectory and we're eating and he's not. So we're not going to change, but what we're going to do is we're not going to eat or drink in front of him. So it's things like that I think, as colleagues, if we understand where people are coming from, it can make such difference to how they feel about their minority identity.
And it makes me think also about what that does to the people around you. So I remember from my own experience meeting the CEO of it was actually NCT, National Childbirth Trust, and they were severely dyslexic, and it was a real shocker for me to see someone who was so severely dyslexic in such a leadership role. My internal bias, I am also dyslexic, but I had limited myself by thinking that those roles wouldn't be open to me. But that changed the moment I saw other people kind of being open and honest about it. So I think when you share with others, it opens the conversation for much more.
I totally agree, and I wholeheartedly encourage people to be as open and transparent about themselves as possible. So thank you for that. The next slide. So this is all building this picture of being self-aware, and self-awareness is very useful. It's very useful knowing yourself, but I think thinking about your strengths and those areas that you really still need to develop in this way, by being reflective and having a real clear sense of what's important to you in your career, will help you on whatever pathway you go along. And think about it in terms of choice, about understanding your own journey and looking for the opportunities that are going to bring the best out in you, that you're going to enjoy, and so on. And don't just take that option because at the moment it seems like fabulous salary, but you get there and you think, is this it? Have I got to do this for the rest of my life? So it has to have more meaning, I think. And I think understanding yourself is the first start of understanding others more effectively. So I think this is all about a number of things about self-awareness. It's about behavior. It's about your identity. It is about who are you? And this little tool I've put up is a way in which you can start the conversation, getting people to really identify who they are and how they would identify themselves. And just by saying, I'm a woman, I'm heterosexual, I am married, and I'm in my latter stage of my career, I'm a Christian. All of those things define me and help shape you. So it's about those kind of identities that mean something to you, and valuing all of those other things that you're the opposite to what you are. And I think it's also about other things. It's about the way we behave. So our behavior is shaped by these things, by self-awareness. I think the body language that we use and how we can convey so much by the way we sit, the way we look, the way our facial expressions. We don't have to say anything to indicate things about ourselves. So we need to be aware of all of that, and also the language we use. So next slide. So the next aspect is something that I wanted to talk to you about, which is about courage. I think all of this, any leadership journey that we go on, requires courage. And I think you have to see courage as a choice. Courage is a choice that you choose rather than it be something you can do or you can't do. Because we all know, don't we, that if you join the SAS, you have to have courage, and you have to also be prepared to fail. I haven't met anybody that has got to the top of their career or being an elite athlete that hasn't failed and failed and failed. But the thing is, they're prepared to fail, they're prepared to pick themselves up, and they're prepared to try again. And it's that sort of courage that enables us to be really innovative. We know that if you're not courageous, you are not going to be innovative. You need it to be able to shape new ideas, stretch what you're thinking. And so I would really urge you to kind of really think about what you can do to be more courageous. And there's a book that I'm going to recommend at the end that I think I'll put it in the chat, actually, by Brené Brown. If anyone's read Brené Brown, she talks about courageous leadership. And one of the things that she says is, we will only be courageous if we know and believe we can fail and can get up again. And that is about mindset. And the other thing that she said is about, in every act of courage, it's defined by vulnerability. So again, you have to feel that you can be vulnerable in order that you're going to be courageous, because you don't want to be shamed or made to feel guilty because you're someone's saying, oh, that was really silly, or making you feel small. So the next slide. So this is something from Brené Brown's book. She talks about what happens is if we are in a situation, in a work situation or in a home situation where we are in a minority, or we're made to feel isolated, or people are biased against us in groupthink, we do one of three things. And I talk to students about this because I think it's important that in classes and things like that, we recognize this. The first thing we do is, if we're in that position, we're like a tortoise. We go into our shell and then we tend to move away. We get self-doubt and we disappear. So we don't want people to notice us. So we just go and hide. Happens in teams, in offices. You see people who just get their head down and get on with it. And we have to ask why. Or they will move towards, because they want to be a people pleaser. They think, well, they're different, but actually the only way I'm going to get on around here is if I become like them and I try to join their gang. And that's, again, none of these things are being very authentic. And the third one is about using shame, because if people get cornered and they feel they're picked on, or they're shamed or made to feel guilty about their difference, what they can then do is get into that toxic state of shame and anger and retaliation. And you see it, don't you? If somebody's annoyed about something that's happened in the team, you see it around the coffee coffee machine, did you hear? And then gossip and all of that. All of these things are really unhelpful characteristics about personality, and that thinking about that and thinking about how we can avoid that is really quite important. Does that resonate, Sarah?
It does. It does. Having to keep in check sometimes your emotions, and maybe having to think again about before speaking straight away, thinking about how others are going to receive your response.
But just by others understanding this concept of we're shoulder to shoulder. And one of the things I recommend people do when you're giving feedback to somebody or a difficult conversation, rather than really being quite brutal or direct in such a way that they will shut down, one of the little tips is to say, I wonder. So you start with something that is a positive, and then saying I wonder if you've thought of, I wonder if you could, is much more gentle way of getting them to do that, sort of coming round to your way of thinking, and really listening to you, even if they don't agree with you at the end of it.
Because ultimately these types of conversations you're having, you're probably working in the same organization and will have ultimately the same goal, or drivers behind things. So you should be finding ways to not to fight against one another, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And there's another person that I, because I try to read and think outside of the box of my group think, so I'll be stretched. And one person I was recommended to read and who's made the point that you've just made is Chris Voss. If you go on YouTube and look for Chris Voss, The Power of Influencing People, his job was the FBI's world leader in hostage negotiation. Now, that will tell you why, when somebody said to me, well, why don't you read this? And I'm thinking, what on earth do I need to read about hostage negotiation? But actually, when I thought about it, and when I read the stuff he's written, it makes so much sense to me in my everyday work. Because I suppose if you've got to stop somebody killing somebody, then you're going to be very skillful at the language you use and how you do it, aren't you? And so there's some really good tips there. So that's probably another one to go on the book list.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to just run through The Art of Possibility is the next one. So this, again, is an author that I've put the book, The Art of Possibility, is in the chat, and it's Benjamin Zander's work. And it's The Art of Possibility is about having that mindset of being really positive. And he talks about the language, and he talks about most people have two types of language. The downward spiral language, where it makes you feel really bad, where you should, you ought, you might, it's your fault, threat, blame. You see the shoulders going down as you're listening to somebody who is in that downward spiral. And it's very easy in staff rooms and things to get into that downward spiral if somebody's having a bad day and they start kind of and then everybody thinks, oh, well, I did get up and was bright. So The Art of Possibility, this book, is a very small book, but I love it because it really talks about how you can change your mindset. And the art of possibility is about keeping the language of possibility. How about, what if we thought of, could we think of doing something this way? So, and again, it also impacts on all of that emotional stuff we talked about earlier. So next slide. So the final thing then is mindsets, and mindsets our mindset kind of brings together all of these different aspects of the way we think and how we think about ourselves and how we think about others. But the mindset is the way in which you can learn to be in a different mindset. If you go to the next slide. And so there are two main mindsets that we can use, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And both are essential for being successful. So there are times when you need that growth mindset, you need the innovation, the creativity, but there are times when you need the fixed mindset, and that's very often when you know there's a crisis, like we had with the pandemic. The principals that were running colleges that I knew were saying you had to have a fixed mindset because you had to do things so quickly. You just told people, how to do it, and they've got to do it that way because there was no time to do anything other. So both are essential, but the more, if you like, flexible of those, and the one that we want people to go to most is the growth mindset, because that is about being open and really thinking about possibility for ourselves. So I'm going to sort of draw this to a close by saying, I've just put some reflective questions in that people might want to take away and think about for themselves, and really start to think about your journey and where you want to go, and whether there are things that you can do to invest in your own development in order that you can take this forward. I should have said earlier, actually, I meant to say, I'm a great believer in the person responsible for our own development is ourselves. Organizations will develop you, and some are fantastic at it. But actually, we need to be responsible for it ourselves if we are going to be truly successful for determining our own life success as well as our work success. And so having a journal, and certainly I've done this, having a journal and reflecting and asking questions of myself, checking in occasionally with where am I, and what else do I need to develop, and what else do I need to strengthen, as well as what am I really proud of that I've achieved, that I can just say, oh yeah, well, I have done some things well this week, is really quite helpful. So I'm going to end on the next slide, and then I'm going to ask for any questions. So if you've got questions, can you put them in the chat so that I can respond? But I love this quote. The highest form of intelligence is the ability to observe ourselves without judging. So don't be hard on yourself. We don't always get it right. We all have failures, but it's about what we do with that and how we learn from that and how we stop being so judgmental about each other. So I hope that was helpful, but I'm really happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Pauline. Feel free to put any questions in the chat. And I have a question for you, Pauline, which goes back to actually your slide around self-awareness, because you touched on self-awareness of language, and I just wonder whether you can expand on that a bit, because I think we can perhaps be aware of the language that we're using when we are very obviously being, there's heightened emotions. But are there any kind of subtle language differences you might also want to notice?
Well, I think it comes back to that stance, the way in which you approach things, and that will determine your language. I think it is about using the language of respect and empathy. So choosing your words that will resonate with someone to get them to listen to you is one way, but also really actively listening to people. And one of the ways in which Chris Voss talks about connecting with people in the right way is if you repeat something that the person has been talking about, because it connects with them. So they will be saying, well, on Saturday I did X and Y and Z and whatever, and my child did. So, oh, that's interesting. Your child did. So connecting with something. That's not a very good example, but you see what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah.
People think, oh, they were listening to me. And then you can go on and have a much more receptive conversation. That's just one little tip.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. We've had a question. Who would you say has been your one biggest inspiration as a leader? And I wonder whether that's someone who is quite personal to you, or maybe it's someone more abstract as well. That would be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a famous one that I would always quote, and a much more personal one. I think the famous one is Nelson Mandela, and the reason he resonates so much with me was the stance he took, rather than, and it goes back to the diversity, rather than confronting apartheid and all the injustice that happened in South Africa. What he did was really powerful, because he did the shoulder to shoulder stuff. And an example that I really love, which sticks in my mind, is called arophilia. I don't know, you probably all too young to remember, but he one of the things he did was the World Cup, the Rugby Cup, was in South Africa, and South Africa was playing. And there hadn't been any Black Africans in the rugby team at that point. It was still, the remnants of apartheid. And what he didn't need to say anything. What he did was he wore a number one African, the African rugby team's shirt, and he had the number one on it. And he just used that as a way of saying, and it was one of those subliminal messages that went round the world, and it shaped and transferred people's thinking, that you don't actually have to say anything, you can do things very subtly. And and the way in his approaches is that soft approach really resonated with me. But I think I think I've had I would say some really good, powerful coaches. That I've always had a coach, because I've always had imposter syndrome wherever I've, whichever job I've had. You never think you're good enough or you can do it well enough, in my view. So to get over that, I've always had a coach, and that has been a really useful thing to do. And one of them is Adi Sharif. I don't know if any of you come across him at all in your travels, but if you do, he is a superb coach. He coaches 4 of the Olympic teams, but his background was a special marine in the boat service. So again, spanning his thinking is just so diverse, and so he really stretched me in my thinking, which is good.
And I love that you chose a coach that is so far from a field in which you're in, because that, like you say, it gives you such a broader perspective on things.
Yeah.
Well, Pauline, we haven't had any more questions, but I'm sure people are, will be thinking about your messages for many times to come. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really are blessed to have you, and we really appreciate you sharing with us your career journey. It was just fascinating. Lovely.
Thank you. And I just want to wish you all every success in your career pathways. And it would be lovely to hear about some of them as you go. I shall look out for names.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Pauline, and best of luck. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.